There you are again. The rain's been busy tonight, hasn't it? Tapping on your window, pressing its soft little hands against the glass, reminding you that this tower is still waiting for you at the edge of your thoughts. You don't have to explain why you're tired. You don't have to tell me what followed you into bed last night or the night before. Right now, all you need to do is listen for a moment to the rain, to the fire, to a voice that isn't asking anything of you except that you rest. Take a slow breath in for me. Nothing dramatic, just a gentle, easy breath. Hold it for a soft count and let it fall out like water running off a stone. Good. That's all you have to do. Tonight, people outside these walls would like to tell you a scary story about witches, about curses and fires and women with cats who live too close to the dark. But you didn't come here for a horror tale. You came here to sleep. So let me tell you a different kind of story about witches. One without screaming crowds. One with rain and herbs and a little cottage at the edge of the forest. You know me by now, but let me remind you for the part of you that forgets when it's exhausted. I'm Ilara. Once, the scholars in the city called me dangerous because I trusted plants and stars as much as I trusted their ink and rules. They didn't like that. My remedies worked just as well in a kitchen or a forest hut as theirs did in a marble hall. So I took my work out here to this crooked tower where no one comes unless they're truly tired of being afraid of their own thoughts. When people say witch, they usually don't mean someone who throws lightning or rides storms. Most of the women I saw called witches were simply the ones who knew which leaves to boil for a fever, which roots to chew for pain, which tea would let a grieving mother sleep for just a few hours. They were midwives, herb women, widows who lived alone on the edge of the fields, too skilled to be ignored, too independent to be trusted. Out there, the stories they tell about witches are full of shadows and flames. In here, when I think of witches, I see someone sitting by a window with a cat on her lap, sorting leaves into baskets, murmuring to herself about the weather and the way a neighbour's cough sounded last market day. Tonight, I want to take the word witch out of the fire and set it down gently in a garden. There was one woman in particular I'd like you to meet. You won't have to get up. You don't have to go anywhere. Just let my voice walk for you. We'll leave this tower for a little while only in memory, and step out to the edge of a forest I once knew very well. Her cottage stood just beyond the last fields, where the ploughed earth gave up and the wild things began. The roof sagged a little under the weight of moss and years. Bundles of dried plants hung from the eaves, sage, lavender, something sharp and resinous that the villagers could never quite name, but always recognized when they walked past on their way home at dusk. In front of the door, there was a rough wooden bench, worn smooth by baskets set down and worried hands twisting together while they waited. To the villagers, it was the witch's house. To me, it was simply the house of a woman who knew how to listen to bodies, to seasons, to the quiet messages plants send through scent and color. Most days, if you came up the path in the late afternoon, you would find her just where you'd expect, at the big wooden table by the only window, sorting leaves. A cat the color of smoke would be draped across the back of her chair, and another, black as wet soil, would be snoring lightly in a basket full of clean linen. Inside, it did not smell like curses. It smelled like thyme and onions, soap and wood smoke, chamomile, and something sweet baking in the coals. This is the woman the stories called a witch. This is the woman who, for a time, became my teacher. When I first came to her door, I was younger than you'd expect, all sharp bones and sharper opinions. The rain had followed me then as well, soaked through my cloak, turned the road into a strip of shining mud. I remember how she opened the door just a hand's width, how her eyes flicked over me from my wet boots to the satchel on my hip to the ink on my fingers. "You smell like books," she said, in a voice that sounded amused and a little tired. "Come in then. We'll see if you can learn to smell like earth as well." That night, I slept on a pallet near her hearth. The cats took turns deciding whose feet would make the better pillow. The fire sighed and settled, sending up the occasional soft crackle. Outside, the forest breathed branches shifting, an owl turning in its sleep, the distant creak of trees learning to bend with the wind. In the darkness, I could hear the faint rustle of herbs drying from the rafters, like 100 tiny hands turning over in their dreams. If you listen now, you might almost hear it too. In the mornings, people from the village would climb the path with their troubles. A child's cough, a twisted ankle, a father who hadn't slept since the last frost. They would whisper, "Witch," on the road, when they thought no one could hear. But when they reached her door, they used other words: good wife, mother, please. The trials and the accusations did not begin as bonfires. They began as small, tired fears, as sideways glances, as muttered prayers, as people asking for miracles, and then looking for someone to blame when the world stayed beautifully, stubbornly human. We'll talk about that later in the night. For now, let's stay a little longer in the gentle part, in the herb-scented air, with the cats, and the woman they called a witch, who was, to me, just another quiet healer trying to keep her little corner of the world from falling apart. When people talk about witches, they like to start at midnight with storms and torches and shadows on the walls. I prefer to start in the morning, in soft light, with bare feet on a cool wooden floor, and the smell of something simple cooking over the fire. If you walk with me now, in your mind, we'll go back to that cottage at the edge of the forest. It's early, the kind of early when the sky is still thinking about whether it wants to be blue at all. Mist clings to the grass, pearled on spider webs, hiding in the dips between roots and stones. The fields behind us are quiet, all the ploughs asleep, the village church just a grey shape in the distance. Ahead, the trees begin not as a wall, but as a slow gathering of trunks and leaves, until, finally, the path bends and the cottage appears. The roof is patched with moss and old thatch. Smoke curls from a crooked chimney, thin and unhurried, carrying with it the scent of wood and herbs and yesterday's soup warming for breakfast. To some, this is a witch's house. To us, tonight, it's just a safe place to sit and breathe. There's a little patch of earth tucked right up against the front wall, a kitchen garden, nothing grand, just enough to keep the pot from being empty. Cabbages with their pale green curls, onions pushing their sharp little tips through the soil, and here and there, pockets of herbs growing wherever they have decided they like the light. Thyme spills over the edges of a stone. Sage stands like a small grey bush, leaves soft as worn felt. There's rosemary by the door, because there is always rosemary by the door. For cooking, for medicine, for weaving into little bundles to hang from the rafters and keep the air sweet. On the wooden bench, someone has left a basket half full of yesterday's work. Dried flowers, crumbs of bread, a scrap of wool where a cat has clearly decided to take ownership. And there she is, the woman they call a witch, standing in the doorway with her sleeves rolled up, wiping her hands on a linen apron that has seen every kind of day. Behind her, the room is warm and dim, lit by the fire and the small, determined light of the window. It smells of onions softening in a pot, bread that will be ready by midday, and the sharp, clean scent of mint and lemon balm crushed between her fingers to wake herself up. A grey cat twines around her ankles, tail drawing lazy question marks in the air. Another watches from the table, eyes half closed, pretending not to care about anything at all. Step inside for a while. The floorboards creak politely under your weight, not complaining, just saying, "Yes, I remember you." Along one wall, shelves bow gently under rows of jars and bundles. Glass filled with dried leaves, clay pots of roots, bunches of flowers hung upside down from beams, their petals turned papery and light as they give up their colour to the months ahead. On the table, a simple cloth is scattered with more plants, some still damp from yesterday's rain, others crisp from a week in the loft. The woman moves her hands through them the way other people might move their fingers through prayer beads. This one for fevers. This one for sour stomachs. This one for the restless nights that come after a child is buried or a harvest fails. Her fingertips know the feel of every stem and leaf. Rough, smooth, sticky with resin, dusty with pollen. She does not rush. If someone knocks, she will answer. If no one knocks, there is still more than enough to do. Stir the pot, sweep the floor, check the bandage on her own knee from where she slipped on the path last week carrying water up from the stream. Around mid-morning, there's a sound at the door, not urgent, not frightened, just the small, hesitant knock of someone who has walked this path before. A neighbour's girl, hair in 2 quick braids, cheeks pink from the climb. She stands in the doorway, holding out a bundle wrapped in cloth. A loaf of coarse bread, still warm, and in exchange, she asks shyly for something for her little brother's cough. Nothing serious, just a tickle, but it's keeping them all from sleeping. The witch smiles, takes the bread, sets it gently on the table, and turns to her shelves without a word. Reaching for thyme, a bit of honey, and a pinch of something only she can recognize by scent. To the girl, this is not a scene from a horror tale. It is just another morning. You see, if you strip away the rumours and the years, much of a so-called witch's life looked very much like any other woman's life in the countryside. Cooking over the fire, washing linens in the stream, tending the small garden so the pot would never be completely empty. The difference was that her garden held more than cabbages and leeks. It held plants that knew how to soothe, how to ease a cramped belly, how to cool a pounding head, how to coax a stubborn cough into loosening its grip. She harvested them with the same hands that kneaded bread and mended shirts. She dried them above the same fire where she warmed her feet on winter nights. If you had asked her what she did, she might not have said witch or healer or midwife. She might have said, I keep people fed. I try to keep them from hurting more than they must. I do what needs doing with what grows around me. From the outside, stories painted her with dark colours, a figure to fear at the edge of the trees. From the inside, her days were made of very small, very ordinary moments stacked together like firewood, chopping, stirring, tying bundles, checking on the old man down the lane who twisted his back. Nothing flashy, nothing that would look like magic from a distance. And yet, how many aches eased here? How many nights of sleep were rescued by a simple cup of something warm and bitter and kind? If you're starting to feel your own body grow heavier as you listen, your shoulders slipping down, your hands relaxing, that's all right. You're allowed to rest here among her simple tasks, as if you'd spent the whole morning helping her sort herbs and bread, and now at last it was your turn to sit on the bench and do nothing at all. Not every day in the forest cottage was the same, but the very best ones, the ones my bones still remember, started with a basket and a path. The woman they called a witch would wake before the village bells, before the first smoke rose from the thatched roofs down in the fields. She moved quietly, so as not to disturb the cats who had appointed themselves guardians of her sleep. A cloak, a knife in a leather sheath, a length of twine coiled in her pocket, and always, always the basket. "Come on, book girl," she would murmur to me, poking my shoulder with a toe. Plants don't wait for philosophers. If you want their help, you go when they're ready, not when you are. Outside, the world was still half asleep. Mist lay low over the ground, hugging the roots of trees, gathering in little pockets between stones. Each blade of grass carried a bead of water, tiny and bright as glass. The air was cool enough to kiss your face awake, but not cruel, just honest. Our boots made soft sounds on the damp earth, a muffled, rhythmic hush that kept time with our breathing as we left the last garden beds and stepped between the trees. The forest path wasn't marked by signs or stones. It was marked by familiarity, by the way a certain oak's branches bowed together to make a doorway, by the hollow in a particular rock where rainwater always lingered, by the patch of stubborn ferns that refused to move no matter how many feet passed beside them. She taught me to notice these things the way a sailor learns the shapes of the stars. "Look there," she'd say, tilting her chin toward a splash of yellow at our feet. "Small flowers, bright as coins, nodding on thin stems. Those are for sore throats. Boiled with honey. Don't take too many, they like company." A little farther on, we'd come to a patch of low green plants hugging the ground like a small, determined crowd. When you brushed them, they released a sharp, clean scent that made your lungs sit up and pay attention. "Thyme," she'd say. "Good for coughs, good for heavy chests, good for the nights when someone is too afraid to breathe deeply." She'd pinch off just the tips, never the whole stem, murmuring more to the plant than to me. "Thank you. That's enough." Then there were the helpers of sleep, the ones the monks would have recognized if they'd ever dirtied their own hands with roots and soil. Pale, daisy-like flowers with golden centers, smelling faintly of apples and sun-warmed straw. "Chamomile," she told me, "for bellies that knot themselves into ropes at night, for minds that will not stop chewing on tomorrow. Steeped gently, never boiled to death. It likes to be coaxed, not commanded. We'd gather them slowly, careful fingers, quiet breath, leaving enough behind for the bees, and for next week. The basket grew heavier, but not in a way that felt like burden, more like a small, portable garden we were borrowing for a while. By mid-morning, the mist would lift, peeling itself away from the trunks of the trees until the sunlight could finally find us in scattered, golden pieces. There was a flat rock beside a thin stream where we always stopped. Someone, long before us, had sat there often enough to smooth the stone with the weight of their thinking. We made it our place. She'd sit, easing the basket down onto the moss, and I'd pull my cloak around my shoulders and tilt my face up toward the light, like one of the flowers we'd been gathering. Sometimes one of the cats would follow us. The grey one, more often than not, you'd hear him before you saw him. A soft jingling of something metal on his collar, and then the sudden, dignified appearance of a small, furred creature who clearly believed he owned the forest. He'd circle once, twice, before choosing which of us to grace with his presence, then settle down with a sigh that seemed far too big for his little body, paws tucked in, eyes half closed, pretending he hadn't walked all this way just to nap on a warm lap. We'd share a heel of bread, a sliver of cheese, passed back and forth between hands that smelled of crushed green things. No one talked about magic. We talked about the weather, the state of the roof, who in the village was due to have a baby before the next full moon. The kind of conversation that could belong to any country woman. In any age, only the list of plants in her head made her different, and even that, to her, felt like just another form of housekeeping. Gathering herbs is not a hurried art. If you rush, you miss the small things, the new shoots hiding under last year's leaves, the way a plant leans toward its favorite patch of sun, the spider who has wisely chosen a particular stem as the anchor for her web. Walking those paths with her taught me something I didn't yet have words for, that healing often happens at the speed of noticing. You bend, you choose, you thank, you move on. One slow gesture after another until, without quite realizing when, you have enough. Tonight, as you listen, your mind is doing something similar. It's walking through the undergrowth of your day. Past conversations, small worries, little aches, and unfinished tasks. It doesn't need to pick up everything. It can choose a few gentle things to keep and leave the rest where they are until morning. If a thought bends toward you like a plant catching the sun, you can notice it, nod to it, and then keep walking. You don't have to stuff your basket until it overflows. By the time we turned back toward the cottage, the basket was full of green and gold and white, and my shoulders were pleasantly tired. The cats would trot ahead, tails high, as if they had been leading the expedition all along. From a distance, if someone had seen us, a woman, a younger girl, a basket, a pair of cats, they might have whispered witch again, wrapped us in their own fears and stories. But inside the circle of our little world, it was just a morning's work, a quiet walk through ordinary magic, the kind that grows from the ground up and asks only that you pay attention and take just enough as your body settles further into whatever holds you now, your bed, your chair, your blankets. Let it borrow that rhythm. Slow steps, light hands, enough for tonight. For a long time, life at the forest cottage went on in its own small circle. Morning light on the garden beds, bread rising slowly by the hearth, people coming and going with their aches and fevers, their twisted ankles and sleepless nights. The world beyond the last field and the village road felt very far away, like a story told in another country, in another language. But stories have a way of travelling farther than we expect. They cling to boots, to wagon wheels, to the hems of cloaks, riding from town to town on the backs of market gossip and frightened prayers. One autumn, when the mornings started tasting of smoke and cold, the first of those stories reached us. It came up the path in the mouths of the very people who needed her help. They still brought their sick children, their sprained wrists, their jars of milk beginning to sour. But between requests, they began to say things like, "Have you heard about the midwife in the next town? They say she lost a baby, and now the priest watches her door." The words were dropped like pebbles, but you could feel the ripples reach all the way to the cottage walls. People forget how fragile life was in those days, how many babies never saw a second sunrise, how many fevers burned through a house before the week was out. When things went wrong, someone always had to carry the blame. If a birth was difficult and the mother bled, the midwife had done something wicked. If a child was born weak or different, perhaps, they whispered, the woman who caught it had invited some dark thing into the room. And if, by some mixture of knowledge and chance, a healer's remedies worked too well, if a fever broke after the priest had already prepared the last rites, if a man rose from his bed the day after he was expected to die, then that too could look suspicious. Too quick, they might mutter. Too strange. Not natural. You see how it is. If you failed, you were dangerous. If you succeeded, you were dangerous. Either way, if something frightened people, they turned their eyes to the person who had been closest to the moment things changed. And very often, that person was a woman with herbs on her hands. The woman in the forest was not foolish. She listened to the stories that came up the path, about trials in towns she had never seen, about healers questioned in the name of God, about neighbors who had once shared bread and gossip, now pointing fingers and saying, "She must have done something to bring this on us." She did not panic. She did what women have always done when the ground starts to shift beneath their feet. She adjusted the way she walked. She started going into the village less often. "Let them come to me if they need me," she said, tying back her hair with a strip of linen that had once been a good shirt. "I will not stand in the middle of their square and give them a target." She was more careful with her words. If someone asked, "Will my husband live?" she no longer said, "Yes, if we can keep the fever down." She said, "We'll do what we can. The rest is in God's hands." To outsiders, It might have looked like nothing had changed. The cat still slept by the hearth. The bread still rose under its cloth. The herbs still hung in their fragrant rows from the rafters. But I could feel a new layer of quiet settle over the house, a watchfulness, like the pause between heartbeats, waiting to see whether the world would step closer or turn away. One night, when the day's work was done and the last visitor had gone down the path with a bottle of something to ease their aching joints, we sat together by the fire. The grey cat had chosen my lap, as he often did, kneading my blanket with slow, contented pause before curling up into a heavy, purring circle of warmth. The woman watched the flames for a long time before she spoke. "You like knowledge," she said to me, "not unkindly. You chase it the way other girls chase music or silver ribbons. But you must remember what it costs to be seen knowing too much." She picked up a sprig of dried herb from the table, one of the sleep helpers, the kind that soothed without stealing. She rolled it between her fingers, and tiny flakes fell back into the bowl like soft, crumbled snow. "When the world doesn't understand something," she went on, "it stands at a crossroads. It can choose to be curious, or it can choose to be afraid." She shrugged, a small, wry motion. "Fear is quicker. Fear is easier to share over ale and prayer." She turned her head toward me then, eyes catching the firelight. "If you go on doing this work, and I think you will, you must learn how to live at the edges, close enough to help, far enough that when people are looking for someone to blame, you are not the first door they think to knock on." Her hand, the one still holding the crushed herb, rested for a moment on my arm. "You are not their God," she said softly. "You are not their devil. You are just a woman with plants and patience. Never forget that, and never let them forget it either." Here, in this tower, years later, her words still feel heavy and kind in my ears. I'm telling you this part of the story not to wake up old fears, but to show you that the monsters in those tales were often just tired women trying to keep their neighbors fed and their children breathing, in a world that did not want to admit how fragile everything really was. You, lying there now, are not standing in any village square. No one is weighing your worth against a miracle. No one is waiting to twist your kindness into something to be feared. You are in a quiet room, with rain and fire and a voice that has no demands to make of you. Let that knowledge loosen something between your ribs. Let your breath spread out a little, now that you've stepped back from the noise of those old, unfair stories. The worst of it belongs to the past. Tonight, you can stay in the soft parts in the herb-filled kitchen, in the forest path, in the simple fact that witch once also meant woman who knows how to help. When you sweep away the stories told by frightened people, what's left of a witch? Not the pointed hat, not the flying broom, those came later, painted on by artists and sharpened by fear. What remains is simpler, quieter, a woman who knows the moods of the sky, who can look at the color of the clouds and say, "Bring the washing in, it will rain by evening." A woman who remembers which plant to boil for a fever, which one to press into a wound to keep it from turning angry and hot. She is the person the village comes to when a baby won't stop crying, when milk won't come in, when an old man's hands have curled so tightly with pain that he can no longer hold a spoon. They might call her witch under their breath, but to her face they say, "Can you help?" And most days she can. Not with spells, not with thunder, but with broths and teas and poultices and the patient kind of listening that makes people feel less alone. That, to me, is what witch has always meant at its softest edge, not monster, but caretaker. Let's take a moment to look at the pieces of the picture they painted around her. The broom, for instance. In the stories, it carries her through the night sky, silhouette against the moon, chased by pitchforks and fire. In her actual hands, it's less dramatic. It sweeps mud from the doorstep. It knocks cobwebs from the rafters. On certain days, it stirs the air above the drying herbs so they don't grow mouldy in damp weather. The great black pot in the corner, they like to say she brewed curses in it, love charms and wicked dreams. Mostly, it held soup, barley and onions, bones from a Sunday roast stretched into Wednesday, a handful of whatever was growing well in the garden. When someone was sick, the pot became a medicine chest broth you could drink even when chewing hurt, steam that cleared stuffed noses and tight chests, and the cat, the cat. In the tales, it's her familiar, a spy for dark forces, eyes gleaming with secrets. In the cottage, it is a warm weight at the feet of the tired, a hunter of mice that would otherwise chew through the precious stores of grain, a small, steady heartbeat beside yours on nights when the wind sounds like it has teeth. When you look closely, all those spooky things turn back into housework and care, cleaning, cooking, guarding food, guarding sleep. Not the work of villains, just the quiet labor of someone trying to make a difficult life a little softer around the edges. You might be wondering why any of this matters to you. Here, tonight, with your own thoughts rustling around like restless leaves, it matters because the same word witch has been used for centuries to turn ordinary care into something suspicious, to make people doubt their own instincts to help, to soothe, to heal. Maybe you have a bit of that same instinct in you. Maybe you're the one who remembers who likes which kind of tea, who listens a little longer when someone says, "I'm fine," but their shoulders tell you otherwise. Maybe you're the person people text when they're not sure if what they're feeling is just a bad day or something heavier. If so, you carry a little piece of that forest woman inside you. Not her danger, the world has changed too much for that, but her patience, her watching, her willingness to stand in the doorway between chaos and comfort. Tonight, though, you don't have to be the one who watches. Not for a little while. Tonight, you can let someone else, an old alchemist in a crooked tower, keep an eye on the fire and the storm, while you finally let yourself sleep, before you drift off. If you like, you can choose where you'd like to fall asleep in this story. You could be on the pallet by my tower hearth, wrapped in blankets, listening to the rain scratch lightly at the shutters, feeling the warmth of your own breath in the small space you've made between pillow and sheet. Or, if you prefer, you can go to the forest cottage instead. Imagine the little room under the eaves, where the roof slopes low and dried herbs hang in quiet rows like upside-down bouquets of summer. There is a narrow bed pushed against the wall, stuffed with straw and scented faintly of lavender and clean linen. A cat has already chosen the hollow behind your knees as the best place to sleep, a soft, steady warmth pressing against you like a second heartbeat. Outside, the forest speaks in whispers, leaves turning against one another, an owl shifting on its branch, far off water finding its way over stones. Inside, the only light comes from a faint glow below the door, where the fire in the main room is burning itself down to quiet embers. Wherever you choose to lie down, let your body take that place seriously. Feel the weight of yourself sinking into mattress or blankets, as if the cottage floor or the tower stones were rising to meet you, promising, "I've got you. You can let go." Your shoulders don't need to hover anymore. Your jaw doesn't need to hold unspoken sentences. Your hands don't need to be ready to catch anyone else's falling pieces. Not in this hour, not in this story. If thoughts come wandering through about today, about tomorrow, about things left unsaid, you can greet them like visitors at the cottage door. You don't have to invite all of them in. You can say, "Not tonight. Come back another day." And then you can close the door with a soft little click and turn back to your own breath, in and out, like the tide, like the wind through trees, like the sound of rain on a roof that does not leak. You don't need to hear the end of every story. Nothing here will be lost if you fall asleep before I stop speaking. In fact, that's the best way for this tale to end, with you already gone, to whatever quiet place your dreams love best. So let my voice move a little farther away, as if I were still talking by the fire in the next room, while you curl up in the darkened loft of the witch's cottage, or under the beams of my tower, with cats and herbs and rain and a night that asks nothing of you but rest.